Tsaritsyn, Stalingrad, Volgograd, a city on the Volga with a difficult fate and a heroic history. This city became the access code to the whole country, which the enemy failed to seize. Today, it is a cultural and industrial center, a historically significant place of whole Russia. Everyone who has heard about the steadfastness and courage of the inhabitants of Stalingrad should visit Mamayev Kurgan, the panorama museum, which is called Battle of Stalingrad, Mirror Street, at least once in their life.
Давно катаешься?
Пару лет как переехал в Волгоград. А вы давно здесь живете?
Я живу здесь 97 лет, но раньше это был совсем другой город.
Stalingrad on pre-war period has a special significance in the life of the whole country. The city, named after the leader of the Soviet people, was to become the center of the exemplary life not only for the country, but also for the entire world community. Stalingrad was developing rapidly. In just a few decades, from 1925 to 1940, it was literally overgrown with new buildings: Movers House, Labor Place, Demonstration Department Store, Elevator. Many of them have become the hallmark of the city. There are parks, squares, architectural ensembles. The exemplary city becomes the object of close attention of photographers and the press. Numerous holidays and events are always held on the large scale and demonstratively with a bias towards ideology and nationality. New monuments are being opened. Public and cultural places are being improved. Fallen fighter squares, Gogol Garden, Stalin Embankment, flower beds, new trees, trimmed bushes appeared everywhere. Everything is for a full-fledged life of the Soviet citizen. Stalingrad grew in scale, flourished in all spheres of life, personifying the unity of the Russian people. It was a real example. It remains so and will be so for centuries. On the morning of 22nd of June 1941, the Soviet Union was attacked by Nazi Germany and its allies. Hard days have come. Long 3 years, 10 months and 18 days lasted the heroic path of the Russian people to victory. The Barbarossa plan aimed to destroy the United Soviet Social Republic state as soon as possible. The German armed forces were divided into 3 groups of troops. Army Group Center was supposed to ensure the capture of Belarus and access to Moscow. Army Group South aimed to capture Ukraine, Crimea and further advance into the Caucasus. Army Group North had the task of capturing the Baltic states, Leningrad and then Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. According to the Hitler's plan, the capture of Moscow was supposed to put an end to the resistance of the Soviet people. The first 3 weeks of the Blitzkrieg were successful. The German command expected to capture the entire European part of Russia by the end of October. But the Soviet people quickly recovered from the blow. Already in August-September 1941, it became obvious that the Lightning War had failed. And although until the beginning of 1942 the advantage was still retained by the Wehrmacht troops, the Red Army began to demonstrate not only heroic resistance, but also to go on a counter-offensive in some sectors of the front. The battle for Moscow lasted from the 30th of September 1941 to 20th of April 1942. It showed the perseverance, courage and strength of the Red Army. There was no question of a quick and successful completion of the military campaign in the USSR. Leningrad in the north was not taken and tied up Army Group North. Army Group Center did not achieve its objective. It did not take Moscow. Only the Army Group South came close to fulfilling the combat mission. The troops captured Ukraine, Crimea, but not entirely. Sebastopol was under siege. The German fascist troops reached Rostov-on-Don, where they met the fiercest resistance of the Red Army fighters. The Barbarossa plan was thwarted due to strategic mistake by German intelligence, under the leadership of Wilhelm Canaris. It was he who told Hitler that all the troops of the Soviet Union were concentrated on the border, which means that having defeated them, there would be no resistance for the further attack. In the summer of 1942, Hitler planned the capture of Stalingrad and the Caucasus. According to his plan, this, supposed to open the way to Moscow from the south, deprived the Red Army of supplies that went along the Volga and cut off the supply of fuel from the Caucasus. But the Russian people hardened. During the first year of the war, hardened in battles, showed the whole world how strong the Soviet Union is. The summer of 1942 was hot in every sense of the word. After the unsuccessful offensive operation to liberate Kharkov in May 1942, the southwestern and southern front of the Soviet Union was significantly weakened. This allowed the German command to put into action the Edelweiss plan to capture the Caucasus, the oil fields of Maikop and Grozny, as well as Stalingrad, as an important transport hub and industrial base of the Red Army. The 17th of July is officially considered the beginning of the Battle of Stalingrad. On this day, the advanced troops of Wehrmacht and the Red Army collided on the Chio River. After the rapid offensive on the 23rd of July 1942, Hitler signs Directive 45, in which he defines the main objective of the offensive: Leningrad, Stalingrad and the Caucasus. German command tried to convince Hitler not to transfer the army of Field Marshal Manstein to Leningrad, but the decision was made, and it significantly weakened the reserves and offensive capabilities of the German troops in south. On 24th of July, the Rostov-on-Don fell. The next day, Novocherkassk was captured. The southern front was breached. The German army gained access to the Caucasus and Stalingrad for the offensive, and the rapid advance of German troops towards the strategic objectives of the offensive operation began. But will they be able to get the main access code? Stalingrad was ahead. In response to the rapid advance of the enemy, Stalin issues Order 227, which is known Last Stand. The fate of the state was at stake. It was necessary to fight to the last and not retreat. Otherwise, the army would be perished. At the end of July, the headquarters of Hitler's Supreme Command was convinced that the key to the gates of the Caucasus was Stalingrad. The Soviet command figured out the enemy's plan and began to prepare the city for defense. On the approaches to the city, 4 defensive lines were formed: the outer, middle, inner, and the city itself. They could not be completed on time, but they still played a significant role in delaying the offensive of German, Italian, Hungarian, and Croatian troops. At the end of August 1942, enemy tank units reached the Volga. On the 9th of August 1942, the command of the Stalingrad front was entrusted to Colonel General Yeremenko, who led the defensive operation to protect the city. The garrison of the city consisted of the 10th Division of the internal troops of the NKVD and separate units of the 62nd, 63rd and 64th armies that retreated with battles. Since the spring of 1942, Stalingrad has been subjected to periodic air raids by German aviation. Their goal was to disrupt the supply of ammunition, weapons, and destroy the infrastructure that provided assistance to the troops on the Stalingrad front. But the work did not stop. The equipment was changed or repaired, the railway tracks were repaired. Realizing how important it was, everyone laid out everything for the defense of the city, both military and civilian. The northern districts, where important industrial enterprises of the city were located, were the first on the way of the Nazis. Being located on a hill, our troops gained a tactical and strategic advantage, not allowing the enemy to seize a bridgehead for an offensive into the city. On the 23rd of August 1942, at the tractor plant, the soldiers of the 10th Division of the NKVD under the command of Alexander Sarayev were the first to engage in battle on the outskirts of the city with the German invaders. At this time, the factory did not stop the construction of tanks, which immediately engaged in battle with the enemy. Sometimes the crews of the tanks were ordinary workers of the shops. Thanks to the feat of the NKVD division fighters, the enemy could not immediately gain a foothold in the city. Fierce resistance allowed to get the time needed to regroup troops and pull up reserves. After a month of fighting, only dozens of fighters remained in some regiments, but they did not give up. And it wasn't about Order 227, but about the conscientious sacrifice they made for the lives of civilians and their fellow soldiers. On the same day, the 23rd of August 1942, the most terrible and large-scale bombing of the city took place. 1,200 Luftwaffe aircraft flew, 2,000 sorties, and dropped 50,000 bombs on the city. As eyewitnesses said, even the stones were burning. It's hard to imagine how many people died. Today, historians claim that about 40,000 civilians were killed. The next day, on 24th of August, the city administration announced the evacuation of residents. But of 400,000 people who remained in Stalingrad at the time, only 100,000 people were able to cross the Volga. On the 25th of August 1942, the capture of the city by the Wehrmacht troops begins. It was a fierce struggle for every street, every house, every stone on the pavement, the most terrible battle of the entire Great Patriotic War. The participants of the battle even used their own terminology. For example, the expression path pastry meant that there were Soviet soldiers on one floor of the house and German soldiers on the other floor. Only in early September, German troops managed to break through the inner city defensive perimeter and enter the city in several areas. But Stalingrad continued to hold on no matter what. Dissatisfied with the fact that troops could not advance and destroy the city, the Führer summoned the commander of Army Group B, Weiss, and the commander of the 6th Army, Paulus, to headquarters, which was at the time in Vinnytsia. After this conversation, the first assault on the city begins on 13th of September. In the area of crossing, German troops entered the city. Fierce battles with soldiers of the 62nd and 64th Armies began here. It was a turning point when it became clear that it was not possible to break the resistance. Key positions were constantly changing hands. Already on 15th of September, the Red Army fighters recaptured Mamayev Kurgan from the enemy. The Stalingrad II railway station became the object of bloody battles 13 times before the 26th of September in order to capture it. Under the insistent enemy artillery fire, air raids, bullets, shells and bombs, the soldiers of Radimtsev's 13th Guards Division were transported to Stalingrad in several nights. They crossed the river and immediately joined the battle. The troops were able to push back the enemies and occupy the coastal streets. There were 200 meters left to the water. The enemy was at hand, and on this narrow piece of land the Soviet soldiers gave a decisive rebuff. It was there that the oath of the Guards was born. There is no land for us beyond the Volga. The authorship of the phrase is unknown. Some believe that it was said by Lieutenant General Chuikov. Although he claims it is popular, others speaks of the authorship of Zaitsev, the famous Soviet sniper. But the main thing is that these words personifies the unshakable spirit of the Red Army warrior. The feat of the fighters cannot be overestimated. Thanks to them, it was possible to hold the crossing and not let the defense of the city fall. One of the significant events of the battle was the defense of the Pavlov house. A group of scouts under the command of Sergeant Pavlov captured a 4-story building in the center of the city and turned it into an important defense stronghold. This strategic point blocked a large area and prevented the Germans from attacking in the direction of the Volga crossing. For 58 days and nights, Pavlov's and Lieutenant Afanasyev's fighters repelled all attempts to recapture the building. Pavlov House became a monument to the steadfastness and courage of the Red Army soldiers. He held out and withstood all 4 assaults of the city. It is worth nothing that among the defenders were Russians, Ukrainians, Georgians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Abkhazians, Tajiks, Tatars. In a single impulse, they created a great legend about valor, about friendship and support, about combat brotherhood, about honor and duty, as an example for all peoples and states at all times. In addition to Mamayev Kurgan, there was another significant height in Stalingrad, Bald Mountain. Throughout the battle, it was defended by soldiers of 64th Army under the command of Colonel General Shumilov. He understood that by surrendering, he would allow the encirclement of the 62nd Army. The general always addressed the soldiers in a fatherly way, was next to them on the front line. He wasn't ordering, he was asking, and the warriors swore that they would not retreat. They kept their word, at the cost of 1,000 lives. After the first assault, there was a second, and a third, and then a fourth, which was the last for the German troops. In the last days of September, Hitler, speaking before the Reichstag, said that Stalingrad would be taken, that if something had already been captured, we would not retreat from there. The advance of Nazis was sometimes only 100 meters per day. The art of war and the tactics of combat were coming to naught. Everything was decided in a single fight, where personal heroism and unthinkable willpower came to the fore. From a BBC report from the October 1942, it is known that Stalingrad absorbed the Hitlerite armies. Poland was conquered in 28 days. In 28 days in Stalingrad, the Germans managed to capture several houses. France fell in 38 days. In Stalingrad, in 38 days, the Germans managed to move from one side of the street to another. The fighting was going on with a varying success. The city was being destroyed more and more. For every inch of land, every stone of the road, blood flowed like a river. Later, after the end of the war, it will be calculated that the average life expectancy of a soldier in this battle was 7.5 hours. The armies changed their composition almost completely. The 62nd and 64th changed soldiers in a combat formation several times by the end of the battle. Only the name remained. People died by the thousands. Since September, Stalin and Zhukov had been planning a counteroffensive in Stalingrad, but for this it was necessary to create a bridgehead and preponderance in forces. It was not possible to achieve this until November 1942. The preparation of Operation Uranus was conducted in conditions of high secrecy. The author of the developed plan is still unknown. The map existed in a single copy. The weeks before the appointed date, postal communication between the Red Army soldiers who fought on the Stalingrad front and their families was completely suspended. Not the slightest bit of information about the planned operation should have been leaked. Not a single word should have been fallen into the hands of the enemy. By this time, most of the city was under the control of the German army. Only the coastal part was in the hands of Soviet troops. After a long and thorough artillery preparation, on the 19th of November 1942, a massive offensive began in several directions at once. It was this important day that remained in history as the Soviet counteroffensive in Stalingrad. And in memory of the role of the artillery in those terrible years, we still celebrate Artillery Day on the 19th of November. The most experienced and combat-ready units were located in and near the city. The flanks of the German troops were converted by Romanians and Italian troops, which stretched out in a wide front. In just 12 days, large groups of troops of the Nazi invaders were repulsed, destroyed or captured. The ring around Stalingrad closed, and the army of Paulus, who had not even imagined such a development of events, was surrendered. Wehrmacht intelligence was stunned by the number of maneuvers, strikes and breakthroughs of Red Army. Hitler gave Paulus the task of holding on at all costs. It was assumed that forces would be sent to help him, which would break through the blockade ring. The headquarters of German command developed the Operation Winter Storm, created the Army Group Don under the command of an experienced Field Marshal General Manstein to save the armies of Paulus. On the morning of the 12th of December, the operation began. With quick strikes of General Goth's tanks, it was possible to break through the defenses of the Soviet troops and launch an offensive. On the 19th of December, several tens of kilometers remained before the encircled group in the city. Manstein asked Hitler to order Paulus to counterattack and advance to join Army Group Don, but was refused. Hitler said that Stalingrad must be held. The 2nd Guards Army under the command of Lieutenant General Malinovsky stood in the way of the German troops, which stopped them in the battles on the Myshkov River. Operation Winter Storm failed. Hitler's army went on the defensive. They never managed to get to Stalingrad. Events after the start of the counteroffensive delayed the destruction of Paulus' Sixth Army, but his turn also came. To do this, a plan was developed for a military operation called the Ring, during which it was supposed to cut off the enemy in western and northeastern parts of the city and then break it up in parts. The command of the operation was entrusted to Lieutenant General Rokossovsky. On the 10th of January, the troops of the Don Front began to advance from all directions. After the Germans lost the airfield through which they received meager supplies of provisions and ammunition, they were again given an ultimatum to surrender, but were again refused. Rokossovsky understood that it was a matter of time. He wanted to save the lives of soldiers, but the enemy was adamant. Berlin did not cancel the order to stand to the death. A few days later, on 26th of January, units of Soviet army converged at Mamayev Kurgan and divided the German forces into two groups, the southern and northern. One of the last radio messages from Berlin on the night of 31st of January reported that Paulus was awarded the rank of Field Marshal to strengthen the morale of soldiers. But this did not help, and already in the afternoon the southern group of troops gave up. The Field Marshal surrendered in the basement of the department store. The northern group, under the command of General Strecker, resisted until the 2nd of February, but also laid down their arms. This event marked the victory of Soviet Union in the Battle of Stalingrad. The German command planned to wipe Stalingrad off the face of the earth, as well as Leningrad, along with all inhabitants. The Soviet army managed to thwart the enemy's plans, but at a high price. The losses amounted to 1,100,000 people, of which more than 500,000 were irretrievable. As part of Germany's criminal policy, not only the military suffered, civilians also paid a high price, victims of air raids and artillery strikes. Even on the outskirts of Stalingrad, the Nazi punishers left a trail of blood behind them. In July 1942, the invaders reached the Nizhny-Chirsky orphanage. First of all, they robbed food, livestock, everything of value. A couple of days later, the Germans told them to prepare children for the road. 47 pupils were loaded and taken to the outskirts of the village. They held bundles in which there were belongings, with the toys in their hands, not knowing what awaits them next. Behind the village, there was a massacre. Children's lives were destroyed. Their bodies were pelted with earth. Innocent children from 5 to 15 years old. Having reached the city and having captured part of the districts, the invaders began to impose their order with fire and sword. At the commandant's office in the Dzerzhinsky district, in other places of the district, in the kindergarten the 8th of March, hundreds of tortured and brutally murdered civilians, including children. We will never forget Dulag 205, where thousands of people were starved and tortured, including prisoners of war, soldiers of Red Army. Now there is a plaque on the memorial site that begins with the words, "No one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten." These and many other crimes have no statute of limitations. We must know and remember that civilians also laid their lives on the altar of victory. The news of the victory spread to all corners of the country and far beyond its borders. There has not been such an emotional upsurge for a long time. Everyone from young to old rejoiced. The soldiers were inspired. The home front workers began to work with renewed vigor in order to finally expel the enemy from their land. Everyone made efforts for this important victory. There are many cases of heroism of ordinary citizens, women and children. Even nature was on our side. What is the feat of ordinary field mice, the disabled German tanks that stood in the steppe for the winter? When they tried to start them, it turned out that the wiring was damaged. It is necessary to pay tribute to the rear supply services, as well the meteorological services of the Red Army, which, with its forecasts for freezing of the Volga, work wonders and help to regularly transport reinforcements, food and ammunition at any time of the year. The significance of the Battle of Stalingrad cannot be overestimated, as evidenced by the attitude of the international community to it during the Second World War. Roosevelt, the President of the United States of America, presented Stalin with a letter from all Americans as a sign of admiration for the feat of the Soviet people. Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, presented Stalin with a sword on the blade of which was the inscription, "To the citizens of Stalingrad, strong as steel, from King George VI," as a sign of the deep admiration of the British people. The memory of the battle was perpetuated in other countries as well. In France, the Stalingrad metro station and the Battle of Stalingrad Square appears in Paris. The Stalingrad Avenue appeared in the Belgian capital, the streets of the same name in Italy, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Cyprus. The Battle of Stalingrad will never be forgotten. The memory of the heroes who threw their destinies into the crucible of war and held their land with incredible effort will live forever. This victory became the access code to the turning point of the entire Second World War. The whole world saw the power of the Red Army and realized that Nazi Germany could be defeated. In December in 1942, in the Stalingrad area, the composer Fradkin met with the poet Dolmatovsky, who wrote a very popular poem at the time, Dancing Until the Morning. The poem appeared under the impression of a story that had happened on one of the dance floors. A military pilot and a lonely girl met there by chance, but the war separated them. The girl tried to find her boyfriend, wrote on the radio, but as it turned out later, the pilot had died at the front by that time. This poem formed the basis of the famous composition Random Waltz, which was born in a train car where the two authors met again in Stalingrad after the battle, on the way from the front command headquarters to the city of Yelts. Initially, the waltz was called the Officers' Waltz, but since it was danced by ordinary soldiers, the name was changed. The song overtook the echelon. All the inhabitants of the country quickly liked it, and it became one of the symbols of victory in the Battle of Stalingrad. And after a while, the famous Soviet performer Leonid Utesov recorded it on LPs and immortalized it in the hearts, souls, and memory of people. After the battle, the city was almost wiped off the face of the earth. The central district of the city turned into wasteland. Only 7 civilians remained alive in it. There are a little more than 30,000 civilians left in the whole city, those who did not have time to evacuate, who survived the battle. More than 40 kilometers of destruction, tens of thousands of destroyed buildings, completely destroyed communications and industrial infrastructure. Mountains of rubble, dead bodies of people and animals everywhere, unexploded shells and mines. This and much more made us think about the expediency of reviving the city. But already in February 1943, Stalingrad became a symbol, not just a city. His fate was decided positively. The beginning of the restoration was laid by the residents of the city, the Cherkassy movement. They were volunteers who independently restored houses, cleaned up rubble, collected children and opened kindergartens and schools, returned life to its usual course. The government needed tanks, so the factories were restored at first of all. In 1944, the first tractors and tanks engines came out of the workshops. Until 1945, restored half of the destroyed housing stock of the city. Hundreds of millions of rubles were annually allocated for the reconstruction of Stalingrad. Volunteers and construction crews came from all over the country. It was truly a nationwide construction building site. After the war, the city began to rebuild at a rapid pace. There were not only new residential areas, but also unique structures such as planetarium, which was built by workers from Germany. Before that, they were only in Moscow and Kiev. A memorial complex was built on Mamayev Kurgan. Because of the amount of spilled blood and exploding shells, grass did not grow there for several years after the war. There was an obelisk on Bald Mountain, a monument to the Chekists and other memorable places of the city that exists to this day. Stalingrad is a hero city, not by order of the country's leadership. This title has been won by millions of lives and destinies that have been woven into its history and left their mark on pavements, sidewalks, squares and gardens. This place preserves the memory of generations, and our aim is to pass this great story on. As long as we remember this feat, the memory of events of the Battle of Stalingrad is alive. Russia will always remember the feat of the defenders of Stalingrad. Their feat is the source of the memorial strength of our fatherland for all the time. Today you have witnessed one of the most important pages in the history of Soviet Union, the Battle of Stalingrad. This battle became the turning point of the entire Second World War. Congratulations to everyone who reached the final of our online meeting. There are only 8 questions ahead and a chance to get a gift from the victory volunteers. Each of the 8 questions is directly related to what you have heard today. And, if you were attentive, you already know the answers. Give the most accurate answer faster than other players to get into the best players list. Nevertheless, from my own experience, I can say that it is more convenient to play from different devices. If you watch the broadcast from a laptop, enter answers from a mobile, or vice versa, it will be the most suitable option, so nothing will fly off. Before we start, make sure that you have a good internet connection. The broadcast does not lag and you watch it exactly in live. And so, not to confuse your answers with someone else's, be sure to find out your ID from the Volontery Pobedy RF website. How to find it? Go to the website where you registered for the action, volonterypobedy.rf. Click the Personal Account button. It is here on the right side of the page. Write it down so you don't forget. We give 30 seconds for everyone to have time to do it. So, we are ready to start. The question will appear here in the broadcast. The answers must be entered in the form for collecting answers. Follow the QR code that is on the screen right now, or follow the link in the pinned comment to the broadcast. So, let us begin. Question number 1. How many days did the Battle of Stalingrad last? 1418, 872, 258. The second question. When many people mention the Battle of Stalingrad, this legendary phrase of the defenders of the city appears among the first associations. It is immortalized in stone on the ruins of Mamayev Kurgan, and its author is considered to be the famous sniper of the 284th Infantry Division, Vasily Grigorievich Zaitsev. What phrase are we talking about? Not a step back? There is no land for us beyond the Volga? The motherland is calling. Have you signed up as a volunteer? The third question. By the end of September, the need to regroup forces became obvious. Then the Stalingrad front was transformed into the Dawn. Name the surname of the military commander recognized by many post-war researchers as the best commander of Great Patriotic War, who took command on the Dawn front. The fourth question. What was the name of the operation to eliminate the 6th Army of the Wehrmacht, which fell into the pincers of the Soviet troops? Uranium, Edelweiss, Winter Thunderstorm, the Ring. The fifth question. The exploits of people who did not seem to be on the front line were also important. By virtue of the representatives of this profession, the Red Army units managed to cross in time and transfer everything necessary to Stalingrad, which was plunging into a harsh winter. Aviation provided maximum support to ground units, and in order to help these specialists in their work, the air fleet created special reconnaissance units. What is the profession of these fighters of the invisible front? The sixth question. In the ranks of the German troops, the great-grandson of one of the former rulers of the German Empire attacked Stalingrad and was captured. The bitter irony for the German side is that it was this ruler who repeatedly claimed, "To fight with Russia is simply madness," whose great-grandson did not heed the words of his wise ancestor. The seventh question. It was said about the Volga stronghold. People stood where the metal surrendered. The stones could not stand, but the people stood. People survived, but it could not survive a huge amount of blood and shells. And the memory of it is now stored in the lines of the Rosenbaum's song. Who or what are we talking about? And the final question of our broadcast. To the citizens of Stalingrad, strong as steel, from the King George VI at a sign of deep gratitude from the British people. A gift with this inscription Churchill gave to Stalin on behalf of the English king. What was the object? A sword? A saber? A rapier? A knife? As soon as you choose the answers, rather press the send button. The questions have come to an end. You have the last 30 seconds to double-check everything. After this time expire, the answers will not be counted. Let me remind you that the fastest participants who answered correctly will receive a merch as a gift from the victory volunteers. So you better be quick! Stop! Responses which were sent after this point will not be counted. And now, let's find out the right answers. To answer the first question, you need to know the exact dates of the Battle of Stalingrad. It lasted from the 17th of July 1942 to the 2nd of February 1943. Exactly 200 days. There is no land for us beyond the Volga. This phrase of Vasily Grigorievich Zaitsev is immortalized in stone on the walls ruins of Mamayev Kurgan. These words are associated with the days of the most difficult battle among its eyewitnesses, and not only them. The third question was about the most brilliant commander of the Great Patriotic War, Konstantin Konstantinovich Rokossovsky. It was him who took command of the Don Front and built the tactics of actions, thanks to which the course of hostiles acquired a different character. To eliminate the Sixth Army of the Wehrmacht, a plan for a military operation called The Ring was developed, during which it was supposed to cut off the enemy in the western and northeastern parts of the city, and then break it up in parts. The command of the operation was entrusted to Lieutenant General Rokossovsky. In the fifth question, we talked about the fighters of the Invisible Front. They were meteorologists. Thanks to the representatives of this profession, the Red Army units managed to cross in time and transfer everything they needed to Stalingrad, which was plunging into the harsh winter. The sixth question tells us about the capture of the great-grandson of one of the former rulers of the German Empire. It was about Otto von Bismarck. On Mamayev Kurgan, the grass did not grow for 3 years. The iron ordered her, "Don't you dare pull yourself up." These lines of Alexander Rosenbaum's song are dedicated to grass. It was it which could not survive a huge amount of blood and shells. The last question is dedicated to the gift of the English king with an engraved inscription. To the citizens of Stalingrad, strong as steel, from King George VI, as a sign of deep appreciation from the British people. It was a sword hand-forged from first-class Sheffield steel. We are beginning to check your answers. Exactly in a week, you will find out who became the best in the game of the Battle of Stalingrad. The first 30 people will receive gifts, a unique merge. Follow the news on the official page of the Victory Volunteers in social network Vkontakte. Today, each of you touched the history of our country. Thank you for your concern. After all, by preserving historical memory, we provide a link between past and future generations.
Город был сильно разрушен. Не было ни одного цельного здания. Погибло очень много мирных жителей, а также погибло много и защитников города-героя Сталинграда. Я, как красноармеец-автоматчик в Калмыкии, не мог окопаться, потому что зима холодная, песок сыпется, окоп никак не выкопаешь, но мы все-таки выдержали и защитили Волгу, не допустили немцев к Волге. Этим самым мы выполнили свою боевую задачу как левый фланг Сталинградского фронта. Это 28-я армия и генерала-лейтенанта Герасименко.